Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Brady Ware Dealership Advisors September webinar. This month, we have a really great topic. Kevin Timson from Bolivia Blatt's with us, and he's going to be speaking about some key considerations in buy-sell transactions. We've obviously coming into the COVID era. There's a lot of buy-sell transactions going on, and it seems now that we're kind of been through this and still living through it a little bit in some areas. We're starting to see some more buy-sell transactions or things to think about. So I think it's a very, very relevant topic, and we're excited to have Kevin with us this month. So with that, I introduce Kevin.
Thanks, Sam. I really appreciate it, and thanks for inviting me back. I really enjoyed the session we had last year, and so certainly this is going to be a continuation on that session that we had last year. For those of you who were there last year in Columbus, and for those of you who haven't been, we'll certainly go over a lot of the issues that we talked about last year, as well as talk about how COVID-19 has impacted the buy-sell market nationwide. So just to give you a little bit of background, I work for Bolivia Blatt. I'm an attorney there. Bolivia Blatt has about 35 years worth of experience. Our sole focus is on helping dealerships, automotive dealerships, marine dealerships, franchised automotive dealerships in particular. That's all we do. That's all we focus on. We are a full service practice, meaning if there's ever any issue that you as a dealer have, whether it's litigation or manufacturer disputes, buy-sell transactions, succession planning, regulatory issues, anything, we have a full staff of attorneys who will be able to address your needs. We're a recognized industry leader. We are outside counsel to several auto dealership associations around the country, and we work with clients around the country as well. So with that, I just want to let you know I help to lead their transaction practice, our buy-sell practice. I'm a buy-sell attorney, and so a lot of what we're going to talk about is based upon my own experiences as well as the things that I have heard to date this year. With that said, we're going to talk about the COVID-19 COVID-19 impact on the buy-sell process. We're going to talk about other major buy-sell considerations. And we're also going to start to talk about a new multiple listing service for the purchase and sale of dealerships called LabNation. So we're real excited to talk about all of that. And so let's get started. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's go through some of the things that have been impacted on the buy-sell process because of COVID-19. So I think first and foremost, the good news is that buyer interest has been relatively unchanged by COVID. And this is based upon what I've heard in the marketplace, as well as what I've heard from clients who are working on buy-sells and my own buy-sell experiences. I think there's a consistent feeling from public dealership groups and large private dealership groups all the way down to single point stores that the long-term market for the purchase and sale of retail dealerships looks positive, and in spite of what's going on in 2020. So that's a really good thing to remember. And I just want to make sure that everyone out there has the assurances that this is a good thing. And certainly there are a lot of challenges. It's not meant to downplay the challenges that COVID presents, but I think there's definitely a silver lining here. And as long as you focus on the long-term aspect of the market, we should be in good shape. Let's talk about the negatives this year. There certainly has been a drop in sales. Most brand sales, for Toyota, Nissan, Honda, all the way to Ford, GM, FCA. For most brands, sales are down 20 to 40% typically for the first half of this year versus 2019 in the same period. Okay, and that is fairly significant, and the reasons are out there because businesses were shut down, consumers were not going into dealerships to purchase cars, consumers were negatively impacted because they were either let go from their jobs or were concerned about the long-term aspect of their own positions. So certainly that was an issue. Fixed op sales, for the most part, luckily had held flat. Sales for service repairs, whether it be warranty or retail customer warranty repairs, mostly held steady. And the reasons for that are pretty obvious, because when your car breaks down, whether there's a COVID-19 outbreak or not, you still need to repair it. So those are some of the negatives or not so positive things that have happened, obviously. The positives are definitely there. New vehicle profits per vehicle have been at their highest point since 2011. Used vehicle profits per vehicle have been at their highest since 2016, and F&I profits per vehicle have been at their highest on record. Now, these are data points that were pulled from the public dealership groups, from their SEC filings. So, certainly that is something you need to take with a grain of salt. But in my own experience, looking at some of the dealers I've worked with who are private dealers, it seems to be a very similar trend, and that has certainly been a bright spot in terms of how dealers are interacting during the COVID outbreak. But the real big story is that dealers really rode out this storm. They control costs, okay? And a good way to point out that is, looking at Automotive News, they had reported that average earnings are down 4.6% for average franchise dealers nationwide. Okay, so in spite of this huge shutdown of a large part of our economy, earnings only went down 4.6%. And, there is the demand side of those earnings. There's also the cost side of those earnings. And really what it came down to is that dealers controlled costs. They achieved rent concessions from their landlords. They trimmed staff. They took other measures to control variable costs. So the real big takeaway is that this can be done, that in spite of these, huge economic challenges from COVID-19, dealers really stepped up to the plate and have continued to run viable operating businesses. In terms of revenue that did increase, used vehicle sales have, definitely had a big spark in demand. F&I definitely pulled its weight a little bit more for many dealerships as well. And so that really helped to counteract any declines in new sales and new car sales. Going back to real estate, if you look at the overall picture for the real estate market, for commercial and retail real estate, it's pretty bleak for landlords. There are many businesses and other retail sectors that, went out of business or closed down for large parts of the year. And, when you have, a relatively healthy operating business like a car dealership, it's a valuable tenant. And so landlords were very, very willing to make concessions because they know and appreciate the long-term viability of those dealerships. So that was certainly important. And keep in mind, this doesn't really even factor PPP loans that are received that will eventually be forgiven, for many dealers. And so when, that, takes place, when that forgiveness happens, this picture will certainly look even better. Another positive really is that, buyer activity for private dealerships hasn't really significantly decreased. I've certainly spent time, looking at other buy-sell market reports and presentations from, dealership brokerages here and there, and certainly talk with a lot of my clients and just look at my own volume. And the volume hasn't really dropped as much as anyone expected. I've heard anywhere from a 10% drop to a 16% drop to maybe a 20% drop. But it's a little bit reassuring, and that was really, looking at the first half of this year. So the second half of this year, the expectation is that, things have begun to normalize for many businesses, for many parts of the country. In some parts of the country, COVID has, been kept under control. There are concerns about a second wave, but, there is very much a sense that, things are, relatively speaking, back to normal. And there have been lots of signs that, buyer activity is going to pick up. So if we look at public dealership groups, there have been several of them who have announced publicly that they'll be committed to buying more stores at the second half of this year. And anecdotally, myself, I've seen more buyers getting back in the game, looking to take advantage of opportunities that might be out there. Another factor is that interest rates remain low. So if you're looking, for lending to acquire new dealerships, interest rates have been very, very low, and you can certainly, pull out cash for refinancing your existing lending commitments. So that certainly is helping. And I think most importantly, buyers are seeing how sellers have been able to survive by pulling out costs from their operations. So it certainly is a phenomenon that hasn't gone unnoticed to buyers out there. Most brands are projecting, typically where they have traditionally projected, for most brands, there are 3 to 4 times projected annual earnings for blue sky value. Dealers who are well versed in remote selling, in particular, will probably see some increase in valuation related to that as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So that's buyer interest. Going to used vehicles, used cars. As I mentioned, used cars have definitely come front and center. There's a lot of demand out there for used vehicles. Inventory has gone down. So the question, from a buy-sell standpoint is, if you're a buyer and you're looking at a particular seller, how good is that seller at selling used cars? Should you retain their used car managers? These are things that are becoming more and more important in the decision-making process. If you're a buyer, how can you improve used car sales at a certain dealership? Very often we see buyers who look at a given dealership and say, hey, you know what, I can increase used car sales because I can get more inventory. I can get better floor plan financing, so I can acquire more vehicles than the seller. Okay, or I might just have a couple of good managers that I can put in and be in charge of several different used car sections within several dealerships. So that's definitely something to think about if you're a buyer. Obviously, from a used car standpoint, once again, it's just something, if you're a seller or a buyer, you need to factor in to any of your decisions. Let's talk about closing delays related to COVID. I think overall, COVID has slowed down the process to closing an asset purchase agreement, or closing a buy-sell transaction overall. And in particular, we've seen that happen at several factories. GM and Ford have a lot of their staff working at home, and so responses take a lot longer. And pretty much everything that you do takes a lot longer. And so you really need to be able to consider that when drafting your asset purchase agreement, that you allow for longer periods for franchise approval. Same thing if you're buying real estate. If you're buying the real estate for a given dealership, I know personally I've ran into situations where the county clerk's office for a given location, where property is being acquired, that clerk's office is now down to 2 employees, 1 person working full time, and they're only open on Mondays and Wednesdays. And so your title company is just taking a lot longer to kind of check all the records. And so that's something that needs to be considered when you're drafting a real estate purchase agreement. But other things as well, DMV. The DMV takes a lot longer to get back to things on approvals and questions. And so you don't want to assume that as soon as you get approval from your manufacturer that, you're going to get a license in a week. It might be 2 weeks, might be 3 weeks. So it's just something you really need to be considerate about and think about. Okay. Also, let's talk about remote selling. I mentioned that would be something that would really come to the fore. And, we talk about how COVID has created some short-term crises, but it's also created some long-term trends. And I really think that remote selling is something that is probably here to stay. It's not going to completely replace sales in the showroom, but it's certainly going to be a bigger, more active component in your sales process. I think for one thing, manufacturers realize that the COVID outbreak was a perfect opportunity to get commitments from their dealerships to invest more in technology and to really improve their processes for reaching out to customers beyond the showroom, and to increase their marketing spend, increase their investment in technology, and just to get smarter about it too, because at that point, that was really the only game in town. But now, that you're seeing showrooms opening up, those remote selling techniques and processes and technology, that's still there and it's still being used. And some of the smarter dealerships are really taking advantage of it as a way to complement their sales staff. And it's something that's really important to know. So if you are a seller, how good are you with your remote selling process? Is this something that is something that you could help to bring to the buyer's organization? Okay, maybe the buyer doesn't have a great process set up, and so they're not just acquiring your dealership, they're acquiring a whole new digital marketing strategy. So those are things that are going to be a consideration in terms of the valuation of your dealership. Okay, if you're a buyer, do you have a good platform that the new dealership can basically be plugged into? Do you have all the technology? Do you have existing contracts with good digital marketing vendors? And so really, this new dealership then just becomes one other place where you can reach out to its customers remotely and to bring in more sales. So just something to think about. In terms of facility requirements, remote selling has a potential to impact facility requirements as well, in a good way for dealers. I always think about a recent example I have, not in a transactional standpoint, but there is a dealer who I work with in the Northeast, and he has an existing facility. There was a commitment to move to another facility that was done several years ago, and given all that's happening with COVID and given the emphasis and success, at least from his standpoint, on remote sales, there was a question as to whether he needed to move his facility into a larger space. And so, that is something that is going to be a question on everyone's minds, whether you are a buyer who is being told by your factory, that you need to move into another space, or if you're a seller who knows that your factory is hounding you to maybe, increase the square footage of your showroom. This could be another way to, negotiate what you have to do and how much you have to spend. So that's really important. Another thing, a little less minor, but still important in terms of evaluating dealerships is what I would refer to as the FTC's cooling off rule. And for those of you who don't know, the cooling off rule is about sales of goods that are made at home. So if a consumer is at home, someone knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I have this to sell for you, and what do you think?" And whenever you think about that, you think about in encyclopedia sales, you think about aluminum siding sales. I think there were movies even on that too. You don't think of car sales, right? But now with remote selling, what's happening is a lot of dealers are dropping cars off at people's homes. And so the cooling off rule basically says that if a sale is made at home, the consumer has 3 days to rescind that transaction. Okay, and that was done once again because of these high pressure sales and other kinds of situations where people are coming and selling goods. So if you are a dealer, you want to make sure that you are just dropping off the vehicles. You don't have your salespeople coming to drop it off and maybe negotiate to upsell a couple of more accessories or voluntary product or something like that. So as you're a buyer who's evaluating a dealership, these are things that you might want to look at as well, in addition to all the other things that you're looking at. If you're a seller, be aware that these are things that could potentially present liabilities, not just for you, but potentially for the buyer down the road. Okay, so another thing to talk about is vehicle allocation. Okay, so the NADA reported that monthly new vehicle inventory for all dealerships went down about 35% in August versus pre-COVID months this year. So, everyone checks on automotive news. They saw that, when the worst of COVID hit, all the factories shut down, in Detroit. And, even now you're seeing a lot of manufacturers, certainly input has increased, but it's not increased back to pre-COVID levels because, you have social distancing issues, you have issues with staff and other things that are, quite frankly, slowing down input and output at these factories. So So that's something that has really become a big issue for a lot of my clients, and I'm sure it's become an issue for many of the dealers on this call. Anecdotally, we've had several dealers across several major brands report that their inventory just is not up to snuff, and that they could sell more vehicles if they just had particular models of hot selling brands. So I think the to do here is really, if you're a seller, you want to be able to document those concerns as soon as possible to your OEM to see that you can get that resolved, okay? Because if you're getting ready to sell, you don't want to have these kinds of issues, and you want to show, all those, great sales that you could make if you had the inventory. If you're a buyer, you want to look at the store performance, within this kind of context. And so if the sales aren't up to what you think they might be, you might want to investigate and see why. Is it because really, they're just doing a poor job at sales, or is it really an allocation issue? So just something to think about. Last but not least, in terms of COVID, we're going to talk about false positives. I know that term gets bandied about right now because of COVID. A lot of COVID tests are false positives here and there, but we're seeing a lot of false positives with regards to sales and service deficiencies, particularly service deficiencies. And so when I talk about service deficiencies, I'm talking about an example where, maybe in April and May, maybe even June, you had a lot of states and localities putting certain controls in place on the sale of retail products, including cars. And, a lot of car dealers don't really have the opportunity to not comply with these rules. And so, they're just the messenger, right? And so maybe there's some social distancing requirements, that customers don't like. Maybe you've reduced the number of people that can go in the store. Maybe you're requiring people to wear a mask, or you're asking them, and that's creating irritation. And so what's ended up happening in a couple of stores, at least that I work with, is that those stores have gotten bad customer surveys, and this has become an issue with the manufacturers, become an issue with buyers, and it's become an issue if you're a buyer, and the factory's looking at the CSI scores of your other stores, or just kind of digging in deeper about your service experience. So you want to be able to be aware of these issues and kind of know how to explain them to other parties, and really help them understand that these scores aren't representative of your service operation overall. Given the challenges that you've had, as well as everyone has had with COVID, this is more of a blip than a real trend. So those are things that we talk about when we look at the buy-sell market here in 2020. Certainly there's other things that have happened, and I'm certainly happy to hear from those of you out there if there are other things going on, and we'd love to hear about that. So next slide, we're going to talk about additional considerations overall in the buy-sell market. Okay, so other major buy-sell concerns. So keep in mind, this is just a highlight. It's not a comprehensive or detailed look at the things you need to think about when you're buying or selling a dealership. What I would recommend is that there's a link at the bottom of the screen here to my firm's website, and this was actually from a video that was shared to us, thanks to Brady Ware. They had videotaped the presentation I gave at the last conference, and so we have that link there, and feel free to go to that link if you weren't there last year. And it's I was told at least it was helpful. So, but it certainly has more detail in terms of the topics that we're going to talk about right now. In terms of some of the highlights, some of the hits from that presentation, that are still very valid, that we talk about with every client, is this list here. So, the reasons for buying or selling, the letters of intent, assets, representations and warranties, franchise approval, and factory rights of first refusal. Okay, so reasons for selling or buying, right? So if you're a seller, why are you selling? Okay, is there a succession issue? Do you have an issue with maybe this next generation doesn't want to be involved in the business? these are things that you need to think through before you decide to put the dealership or dealerships up for sale. And maybe there's other options. Maybe there's an option to get employees involved or managers involved in terms of the ownership and management of the business going forward. So these are things that you can certainly talk about with your attorney and your brokers as well, and your accountants. Is it a performance issue, right? So the performance issue, occurs very often when, maybe there's a dealer who, is looking at, 2020 and is very, disconcerted and doesn't want to continue, and so you have to think, well, are these long-term issues or short-term issues? And that can vary across every dealership. So certainly talk with your accountants and your attorneys, regarding the state of your dealership right now. But for many dealers, I find the opposite also applies too, where we have dealers who you may have gotten default notices from their manufacturers, and they feel like, well, we're just going to fight it and this and that. We're going to fight the termination. And, those are folks that might benefit from selling. And, maybe the issue is that they think the valuation is a little bit higher than what the market is willing to pay. And so these are discussions that need to happen, that have to happen, and they need to happen, in a frank and honest way. And so certainly bringing in accountants, your attorneys, valuation professionals, brokerage professionals will help facilitate those conversations. Why are you buying if you're a buyer? So, very often there's two kinds of situations. One where you have a buyer who's rolling up local brands, right? So you are in a certain, town, you're in a certain geography in a certain county, and you have a good reputation locally as a dealer, and you just want to add additional brands. So, certainly when it comes to drafting the agreement to purchase that dealership, that will definitely come into play. I mean, there's confidentiality issues that you need to consider to be able to control. There is maybe the potential to consolidate real estate. Maybe the deal might be held contingent upon relocating to a piece of property that already has your other dealerships on it. And so those are things that we frequently navigate through with our clients. Maybe you are a buyer that is rolling up, the same brand across several different regions, so several different localities, maybe across county lines or even state lines. And so if that's the case, before things move quickly and before you sign anything on the asset purchase agreement, you want to think about, several issues, that might be important in that one particular geography that might not have been important, for your other stores, state requirements, you name it. I mean, we had, for instance, a dealer that, was a New York-based dealer, had been interested in purchasing a Connecticut store. And one of the things, we talked about was that Connecticut doesn't provide a provisional DMV license. So, once the deal is approved by the manufacturer, it takes a lot longer to get, that DMV license because, they're going through every single aspect of your background because it's not provisional. It's a full license. So that's just one example. So I think in general, when it comes to buyers, why you're buying, it really comes down mostly to, you need to buy if you have a successful platform. And by a successful platform, I mean one that capitalizes on performance consistently across the board for all of your dealerships. And it's really about adopting that platform to every dealership you buy. And so that platform will include things like a good management team. It will include, the capital that you have to invest in the business. It will include the banking relationships that you have. It will include the relationships you have with the factories. It will look at your local brand. It will look at the technology that you will use to reduce costs and help improve service. So we talked about remote selling. So certainly that's an obvious aspect of the platform. We talked about used sales before as a way to kind of help, take that store that you've bought and to really improve it in ways that maybe couldn't have been done by the seller. So, these are really things that are important to think about. Letters of intent, once again, I think after I had done my presentation last year, I came across a couple of situations again with new vehicle dealerships, selling for the first time who, had written out some a term sheet and then had a little section that was penciled in that said, that had their spot for a signature. So please, please, please don't sign any term sheets. Okay. If you want to, have some kind of commitment, or you're being told that you need a commitment, or put certain terms down, in writing, then, consult your attorney. We can always put this in a letter of intent, and a letter of intent is just that. It's intent. It's not a concrete promise. And, we can keep things proper, while having enough breathing room to keep the transaction and to keep negotiations going. So that's really important. Reps and warranties for buyers. You need to get assurance from the sellers about the state of their, various assets, like their special tools, for warranty work. You need to know that, okay, do I have a complete set or not? Little things like that. You need to know whether there's any sales or service deficiencies that exist, whether, the seller has gotten notice lately, whether they've gotten notice about their facilities and things like that. These are lots of little things that people don't think about in the rush to, sign an agreement that, definitely help if, bad things happen, right before closing. You need to make sure that once you sign on the dotted line for this agreement, that the seller is not going to change operations on you. They're not going to start wholesaling lots of vehicles. They're not going to start giving their friends and family special deals, that they will leave in terms of, unfulfilled orders, sales orders for vehicles. You need to make sure that the operation stays in business. They're not, looking to change their profit levels. They're going to keep the same hours and things like that. A lot of obvious things, right? For sellers, you need to get assurances from the buyer that the buyer knows of no reason why they will get rejected from a given factory. And, very often this is not an issue, but when it is an issue, it can really side rail a transaction in a way that no one anticipates. So we've had situations where buyers have come in, they expressed interest in doing a deal. The deal becomes protracted and heavily negotiated, and then approval never happens because there's some issue that got recorded in the DMV, a customer service issue with the dealer principal, and that was stuff that buyer knew of. And if we had if you have that kind of provision in there, then it certainly helps, and luckily we did. But it's something I always advise every dealer I work with to make sure you have those provisions in there. Franchise approval, really it's about making sure you have enough time to get that approval. So like I said, things take a lot longer with COVID. So 90 days, start off with for instead of 60 or 75. In many cases, at a state level, you're required to get 60 days, but being able to prove that is sometimes difficult. You want 90 days and then the right to extend that another 30 days. This is something where, I'll talk to my own clients and they don't want to, ask for that because they feel it means that, it's going to take that long. But in reality, it's about being able to not get blamed or not get snagged for something that is completely out of your control. And it's an education process for a lot of our clients. And so it's something that folks on this call, if you haven't thought about that, it's something that you definitely need to think about. Last but not least, let's talk about factory rights of first refusal. So those rights of first refusal are really about, being able to get a preferred dealer in to a certain store. Sometimes it comes up, and we frequently have a lot of clients who are buyers who want to be able to, find ways to combat the right of first refusal. So you have to think about what's going to make this deal less attractive to a given assignee. So someone who's going to take over that right and then purchase the dealership. So you can set up a stock purchase agreement where you get 90% of the store, of the ownership of the store, and then within several years you can have the right to purchase the remaining 10%. Usually other buyers won't want to take on the seller in terms of management. There's also ties to the real estate. Usually the real estate is very often a lot more expensive than the actual dealership. You want to have maybe some reasonable structuring fees, basically the cost of the transaction to you to go through this. So the cost for attorneys, accountants, consultants, environmental consultants, you name it. it can't be $1 million, but maybe it's, $200,000, $150,000. And that alone won't be a deterrent, but combined with other factors, it might be. And then, things like consulting contracts, offering the seller a consulting contract afterward, but once again, these are all dependent upon what you want and what you're willing to do as well. Okay. So really that's it in terms of, buy-sell factors. Let's go to the last slide, or the next slide, I should say. So real quickly, I wanted to talk with you about LabNation. LabNation is a new kind of dealership brokerage. And so this came about because, myself, Len Belavia, our senior partner, and lots of the other attorneys that we work with are always getting asked by dealers, hey, do you know of someone who might want to purchase us? Or do you know of dealerships that might want to be bought, ones that are up for sale? So we get both of those. And so we've gotten that so much. And I know, Sam, we've had a conversation last week about some dealerships in Ohio too, where you've had a similar experience. And so, it really got us thinking that, why is it that clients, dealers are coming to us to ask about that? One is because we have a knowledge of the market, and two, is because they have a certain trust in us. They know that if they ask, that it's going to be confidential, that we're going to work confidentially, that there's a certain decorum and a certain process that we follow that really follows their interests. And so, with that in mind, there's a sister company that has been set up. It's not, part of our law firm, but it's a separate company owned by Len Belavia, called LabNation Dealerships, and it is going to be a network of 50 attorneys and 50 CPAs, and it's going to be the first multiple listing service of its kind for the sale of dealerships across the country. And so when you think about a multiple listing service, a lot of us don't really think about that unless we're selling or buying a house. Think about before they had multiple listing services, you had one broker, and that broker would go and look for clients who might want to buy, right? If you're listing your home. Now that broker could reach out to other brokers who might have clients who might be interested, and so on and so forth. And it's an exponential effect. And it means if you're a seller, whether it be residential real estate or whether it's a sale of a dealership, you're going to get more buyers, you're going to get better offers, and you're going to be able to, have more control over the terms of the deal. And so we are very hopeful of this. If you're a buyer, it means that you're going to get access to many more deals that you might be interested in, just because of the power of having 100 folks out there who are looking and scouring for deals and helping to bring transactions to bear. When you look at some of the other dealership brokerages out there, they usually focus on the top end, and that's really for a reason, because they only have a certain number of people who can look for deals and who can match up buyers and sellers. So economically, it makes the most sense for them to go after that. Here, economically, we can go after really the rest of the marketplace. There are 17,000 stores, automotive franchise dealerships out there in the country, and many of them aren't really being serviced properly, or they're being underserved. So this is a way that we can adequately serve those dealers and those dealerships. So we're really excited. We're going to have nationwide coverage. It's going to, it's going to be great. We've already gotten commitment from many participants, CPA firms, law firms, including, fortunately, Brady Ware as well. So we look forward to working with Brady Ware through LabNation, and we will certainly provide you more detail, more information as things progress. So that's it for my presentation here, my input, my 2 cents. If anyone has any information, you can certainly reach out to me directly. That's my office number. I also have my email address here. If you want to go to our website at dealerlaw.com, and you can go to dealership-buy-sell to get more information about what we do as well. Thanks again, Sam, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kevin. A lot of great information. I know it's been a little bit different year for all of us, and I think it was some good insight on stuff you're seeing and deals. And it's always great to hearing your insight on buy-sell transactions. And yeah, and we are very excited about LabNation. I think all of us get get some of these calls or stuff from dealership clients and dealer people looking for deals. And I think putting good folks together could really enhance the process. So we're really excited to be part of that. So thanks everyone for joining in this month, and we're excited and hope you join us next month for our next webinar, and look forward to seeing you then. Thanks. Bye.